Hello, and welcome to the Cycle Starters podcast. My name is Heather Rebecca Wilson. I'm your host. And on this podcast, we talk everything ancestral healing, astrology, and embodiment. Today, I have a very special guest to introduce to you, Jane Garnett. Hi, Jane. So happy that you can join us today. How are you doing?
Great. Very happy to be here.
I'm going to read your bio and then we're going to get into our conversation. And I'm really excited about it. So thank you again for saying yes to doing this. So Jane Garnett, aka thebananajane, is an Oxford-educated psychotherapist, an EMDR guide, and the host of Sex, Psychics, and Psychedelics, a podcast about the healing power of fun. She has recently launched a movement called HeartParty that brings together healers and disco to celebrate the idea that we are the medicine. So much there.
Yeah.
That we can dive into that's super juicy. Well, so let's start very simply, since this is the Cycle Starters podcast and we're talking about breaking intergenerational patterns and starting new cycles. I would love to know a little bit, as much as you feel comfortable sharing, about your ancestors and your ancestry.
Not a simple start, but I'll try and make it simple for you. So I'm going to mostly talk about my parents and then a little about their parents. So my mother's side of the family came from Scotland, the Scottish Highlands. And my father was born in California, but was brought over to England. He was denaturalized and he was brought over to England. So I'm now in California myself, but I grew up in England and I came out to California to kind of connect the dots between these two apparently very different sides of my family.
Fantastic. What's your ancestral healing journey been like so far? And you can, share highlights. I'd love to also hear what the biggest challenges have been for you.
Yeah, I mean, when you say ancestral healing journey, to me, it's everything, meaning it's been my life's work thus far. It doesn't necessarily look that way. If you run into me on Instagram, you wouldn't think, oh, this woman has been on a big ancestral healing journey, but I absolutely have. I think my whole life has been about ancestral healing. I was always aware of the rifts in my family. I was a child of divorce. I never remembered my parents together. So I always had that as a split. And I also was always a sensitive and highly attuned child, very sort of perceptive. And so the volume of the unsaid was always very loud to me. So I always felt pain and difficulty that wasn't being acknowledged on the surface. So on my mother's side of the family, there was a lot of trauma. And I think that was normal in many ways in the sense of losing family members to war. But in particular, my mother's father was assassinated when she was 5, and it was never spoken about in the family. So there was this very traumatic, and there were quite a few traumatic things, but that was a very, very central one because it was very central, obviously, to my mother and my mother's experience. It happened around Christmas, and so for her, every Christmas, this memory would come back, but it wasn't really acknowledged because that was how it was dealt with in those days. My grandmother was a stoic to the max, and really, I think, was maxed out. She'd had a terrifically hard life and lost most of the people that she cared about and was the caretaker. And so by the time this happened, by the time her husband was murdered, she felt the way to endure was to not speak about it. So different culture, right? Different culture, different times, different thresholds. So a lot of my journey has been about connecting with her and her pain. And she passed when I was 14, and over time has really revealed herself to be a tremendous ally. So she and I are close, I would say. And I feel, I've had sort of communions with her, and I feel like she's appreciated the work that I've been doing to kind of metabolize this. But yeah, so I was always sort of aware that there was this difficulty at the heart of things. And it wasn't just me reading between the lines. There was also a big family narrative of loss, but it was more around property. So my mother's side of the family came from a kind of royal lineage in Scotland, and there was a lot of property that was owned just a generation back, actually, by the same grandmother I'm talking about. She ran out of money to sustain the properties and passed some on to her younger son and had to sell others. And so basically, by the time I was growing up, we were holidaying in this beautiful place in the Highlands of Scotland and driving by all these incredible places that we used to have. So it'd be like,
Oh, wow.
In particular, there's this very famous castle called Castle Stalker that is out on an island in the loch on its own. And it's, it's as romantic as can be. There's lookouts where tourists stop and take pictures. And we were the tourists, but it was just ours. And so there were a lot of things like that about, sort of like past glory. And it was such a bummer. I mean, it was just such a bummer. And so I grew up thinking, well, we've got to sort this out. Like, I don't want my life to just be lived in the idea of loss, So I was like, so I went after all of these things in kind of the first half of my life to restore glory. And that also connects me to the other part of the story. So on my dad's side, there were also all these glory stories, like lost glory stories. So my dad was the son of a famous Hollywood film director called Jane Garnett, who I never met because Tay had disowned my dad because he'd gotten such a terrible fight with my dad's mum that she had essentially taken him from California to England and said, "You're never going to see this guy again, F you." And he went with it again, partly the times, and who knows what else was going on with him. He was like, fine, that's not my son. So my dad grew up kind of illegitimate in a way and certainly saw himself as such, and was in a shame relationship to his own father, and grew up with these, there was press cuttings and of like this honeymoon that he and my grandmother took around the world on this single mast sailboat and visited countries never visited before by white people, and so glamorous. She's wearing like mink coats. They had a band on board the ship. They had their own band. Can you imagine going on Hollywood honeymoon with a Hollywood director? You got your own band. You're going to, it was really, really high level sort of stuff. And so, but again, all gone by the time I'm growing up. I'm like, no one has any money. No one has any fame, but on both sides, we've got this, like, all this kind of amazing stuff that's happened. And then I can feel this pain underneath. And I'm like trying to put it together. So the first half of my adult life was kind of, I call it, I've actually just written a book about it, but it's kind of trying to win back the castle in my own way. So I marry a very successful Hollywood filmmaker who has a beautiful house, overlooking the sea, and I have my kids, and I'm in the film business too, and I work with Leonardo DiCaprio. I set up a production company with him, and I have a beautiful office looking over sunset, and I get all these bragging rights. I'm like, okay. And then, of course, it gets to that moment of like, it didn't fucking work. Excuse my language. It didn't work. Right. This whole thing doesn't work because I'm too sensitive to the depths, for want of a better word, to be able to deny it. And so all of these efforts to get all this kind of stuff on paper of what a successful life looks like, and I'm not happy. So what's wrong with this picture? So at that point, I start deep diving. In earnest, I become a therapist. I take every psychedelic I can get my hands on. I work with shamans. I work with mystics. I become a meditation teacher. I get a divorce. I start like unraveling my life. And there are times I think I am unraveling, and I am unraveling in a way. And there's not much I can do about it because it's my soul. And this is my big learning journey, is this sort of, it's the dark night of the soul, and this clash I have with my family where I'm suddenly like, wait a minute, because it's been coming online through ayahuasca and all of my research, and everything I do takes me back to the same place, childhood pain that was because of the pain that went before me. It was because of my dad's pain, that was because of his dad's pain, it was because of my mum's pain, because it was her mum's pain, all this pain, and it hasn't been acknowledged because the family culture is to talk about all the glory stories. So when I go from being, Hollywood producer working with Leonardo DiCaprio, making movies in Prague, being with the movie stars, et cetera, to being a boring old therapist, my attention plummets in the family system. Nobody really wants to talk to me. I'm like 40 years old at the family gathering, feeling like chopped liver, like shit. And, it doesn't necessarily seem like a good idea. Then you're like, well, maybe this whole therapy mission, maybe this whole healing thing is like just another wrong turn, and it's getting me less attention and less love. In fact, I'm being kind of pushed to the sides on it. So it was a really rough stage with my family that went on for a while and eased over time. And one of the things that was happening is, and I'm sure you're familiar with the scenario, is that when you start to heal and you start to see things that you think your family hasn't seen,
Mm-hmm.
it's very easy to shout about it. So I think in my own way, I don't know if I was literally shouting, but I was like, we've got to deal with this. This is urgent. This is, this happened. We have to look at it. We have to heal. Now, a little wiser, and I'm, a little bit more fluid about how I talk to people about things. Understanding people are at different stages, as am I. So try not to be quite so full on, but I think it was pretty full on, and it was a lot for them because I was out there in California amongst the seekers, the healers, and the woo, and they were still in their England systems, or my dad was always on his own track anyway, didn't want to talk about anything, so I was kind of alone in this we need to talk about it kind of campaign. And over time we did talk about it, and over time things changed. Not with my dad, because he's never had any tolerance to talk about it. So over time, I just let that be. But with my mother, my sister, my brother, I speak to less, but we never had these issues. I always feel like it was me, my mum, and my sister who grew up, together, that were in this kind of nest of ancestral issues. And over time, our relationships have gotten stronger and more honest. And I think for me, very simply put, I needed to speak up about my experience. And even if it wasn't particularly welcome at the time, over time it was integrated. And so I think the cycle that I've broken is on hiding trauma and pain behind winning.
Wow. Well, so thank you for sharing all of that. There's so many nuggets in there, but I love what you shared about how when this first came into your consciousness, that there are these family patterns that we need to break, right? And we need to heal this. At first, you were very like gung-ho about it. Over time, you realized I need to be a little bit more fluid in the way I approach this topic, because everybody's in a different place with their own healing journey, their own evolution as a soul, right? Their own soul growth. And you decided, you know what, my dad's not really up for this, so we're just not going to talk about it. But over time, as you became more fluid, some family members began to open up. And I think this is such a powerful story to share for folks, because not everybody's going to do this work in this life. They have another soul assignment, right? So in my practice, I've learned the hard way, you can't drag people to their healing. And the folks that say yes to this, it's not for the faint of heart, but there are ways to talk about these things that are perhaps more gentle, not as confronting. But it is confronting, though. Like, ancestral healing is pretty confronting, and you're a therapist, so you are trained, and you just have like a lovely personality, right? You know how to talk to people and connect with people. But I think that's like an important story to share with folks, because there are going to be some people in your life who, for whatever reason, aren't available to go there. And then there are people who, will open up and engage with you. So, I mean, could you speak more about that?
Yes. I mean, I think when I look back at myself in the early days of sort of confronting the issues, I was seeing this elephant in the room and I was shouting about it. Now, after a lot of time, I see that there's always more in the room than the elephant. And so you see the elephant in the room. And yes, I think, again, if it's in your soul that you have to bring it to light, that is what you have to do. And it can be really rough, and you have to have compassion for yourself as that role in the family. It sucks.
It's really hard.
Sucks. Rocks. I mean, looking back, I'm grateful for this opportunity to look back and think about, see the curve of it, because I mean, I thought I was stuck in just this like abject position. You're in this outsider position, seeing stuff, and it's your truth, and it's the only way forwards, and it's this barren landscape because no one wants to join you on it. But again, just because you're in a barren landscape doesn't mean that there aren't, flowers around the edges. You just might not be able to see them. Just because all you can see is the elephant in the room doesn't actually mean the elephant is the only thing in the room.
Right.
And so, reality is nuanced, tolerances are nuanced, and healing is nuanced, and it keeps changing. And so where my healing used to be, I have to bring the shadow to light. Now I'm investigating the light more. So where I used to look at my mother's, how can I say this? What I called like a joy override. Like she'd be struggling and be like, let's throw a party. I would just be like, she's ignoring the struggle. The struggle is real. And now I'm more like, oh, she's a genius. Let's throw a party. Now, I don't believe we shouldn't ignore. I do think we want to look at everything. Personally, I feel like, everything should have its day in the sun, including the darkest of shadows. That's my deep belief. There's something about, balance there to speak to. But the art that my mother cultivated through her received legacy of hiding trauma, right? The art of survival and even thriving was to say, in spite of all these difficult feelings, I'm going to keep celebrating. I'm going to keep throwing parties, making art, putting my best foot forwards, creating magic however I can. And she did that. And as I sort of learned that as an adult and see what she has done with what she had, I am in awe.
Mm-hmm.
And the same with my sister, where I used to be like, she's not admitting this. She's not seeing this. She's not speaking to this. And now she does with me. In fact, we were just talking about it today. I said, I'm going on an Ancestral podcast. What do you think? And she's like, yeah, you broke the cycle of hiding pain. And it's been brutal at times. I'm like, I know, I'm sorry. But it is, because it is pain, right? So you are talking about pain, so you have to bring it up. But now I think, gosh, we've got this really rich relationship, and we don't have to tiptoe around things because we've faced the beast from a lot of angles. Maybe not all the angles. There may be still more to come. We'll see. But yeah, the trust that evolves over that, the respect that evolves over that. And then once you've got that off your chest and you can return to your family and see their strengths, it's such a blessing. And I didn't know that this bit of the journey was going to come. All I knew was I was kind of locked in this soul work of bringing the truth in what I perceive to be the truth, just to kind of, I don't know, I just felt like I kind of had to. And now I'm in more of a like celebration section where I'm just in awe of my family's strength and looking at what I can carry forwards from them.
I love that.
Mm.
Well, so speaking of soul work, the Ancestral Healing Collective monthly membership that I created is a sacred space for female-bodied cycle breakers to alchemize deep ancestral wounds into spiritual gifts, creative potential, embodied joy, and shifts to higher consciousness using astrology and pleasure as transformative medicine. If anyone's interested or if this piques your curiosity, go to heatherrebeccawilson.com. You can learn about all the membership perks and what's in our resource library. But I wanted to ask you, if you feel comfortable sharing, what's your sun, moon, and rising sign?
I'm not going to be able to tell you this. I mean, I can tell you when I was born, which was June 30th, 1975, and that my star sign is Cancer. I don't know the time of birth, unfortunately. Okay. Mum was high, can't remember. Mm-hmm. So somewhere high in the sky. I don't know. Yeah, that's all I know.
You're a Cancer.
I'm a
sun.
Cancer.
Okay. Well, that tells us a lot
Okay.
Cancer is cardinal water, and water is our
What does cardinal
emotions.
mean?
Cardinal means it's the initial thrust of that element. So we have an astrological sign in a cardinal modality that starts every season, right? So Cancer is that initial thrust of summer, at least in the hemisphere that we live in. And water is our emotions, our feelings, our sentiments. And so there are three different modalities when it comes to astrological signs. So we'll have a sign that is fixed in a fixed element in the middle of a season because it's the most stable expression of that season. And then each season ends with a sign that is in a mutable element, and mutable means changeable or adaptable. And so it transitions us into the next season, and then we have another cardinal sign. And so each sign is a spectrum of psycho-spiritual energy with a high expression and a low expression. And so my mother is a Cancer, and what I know, and I want to see if this resonates with you. So your sun sign is basically where the sun was the day that you were born, and it reveals where you shine, right? It reveals the special sauce that you mix into everything that you do that makes you stand out from the 11 other signs. And so for Cancer, being cardinal water, this is strong emotion. All of the water signs are extremely psychic and intuitive. I know just from the conversations that we've had previous to this podcast that you are very psychic, that you are very intuitive. And in fact, you are a therapist, right? So you're using it all the time, right? You're using it professionally. But Cancer is ruled by the moon. It's associated with the mother. It is a very loving and nurturing energy. Family is very important to Cancer. Community is very important to Cancer. So that includes like family heirlooms, right? Being the emotional archivist of the family. That is very Cancerian. So does any of that resonate with you?
Totally. Yeah, the emotional archivist of the family. I'm just like, sometimes I hear myself banging on about ancestry to other family members, and I'm like, they don't care. And it reminds me, I've got some cousin I've never met in South Africa who's like the actual archivist of a branch of the family. And I always think, oh, how boring, he's collecting all these facts. I don't collect facts, but I do study feelings.
Yeah.
So yes, it makes a lot of sense. I'm a mother to two daughters who are,
Hmm.
the apples of my eye, the center of my world. And they are also my teachers. And so it runs, motherhood has been, huge teaching. And it's definitely been an archetype that keeps growing, it keeps
Hmm.
growing. I'm just like, damn, it was always a big one. It's got to keep growing. So yeah, I feel very, as I've gotten kind of more into my own softness, which has been a deliberate journey, I am more and more connected to the mother in me, the fierce mother and the soft mother, the nurturing mother. And yeah, I mean, I feel a call towards mothering in many forms.
Beautiful. Well, so just switching directions a little bit because your biography, your life is so interesting. You're hosting a podcast called Sex, Psychics, and Psychedelics. And we have to talk about this because I don't think that most people, I would say, I don't think the vast majority of people understand that working with sacred medicines, including psychedelics, can really support you on an on an ancestral healing journey. It certainly has supported me. I would not be where I'm at if not for these medicines, like working with them in a respectful and conscious way. So I'd love for you to share a little bit about this. Maybe what was your inspiration for creating the podcast and how you have worked with psychedelics for soul growth
Mm.
and healing.
The reason I started the podcast was because ever since I became a psychotherapist, I felt that something was missing. I had been in the film business, so that's part of it. I went from a very dynamic world to a world that was very quiet. So part of me was just missing the action. The other part of it, though, was just as I had felt with my family, there was too much focus on fun and not enough on the pain. In therapy, I felt like there was too much focus on the pain and not on the fun. It's always this sort of Goldilocks syndrome situation going on. I was kind of looking for balance in my own mental health and in mental health in general. And I did feel that instinctually that therapy had an issue in its hyper focusing. Therapy was hyper focusing on, brokenness, what went wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt we weren't talking about joy enough, but I didn't really know how to get to it. So it was a simultaneous journey. I was looking for more joy in my life and more connecting of the dots, but I also felt like I don't know if I'm serving my clients fully with this methodology. It's still a little wrapped up in the man in white coat syndrome, which is like the idea that I know stuff that you don't know, and I'm going to deliver some wisdom for you in return for some payment. And so, I was looking at my professional life, knowing something was missing. And that's when I started doing psychedelics, and it was starting to change my practice. So after I did my first ayahuasca session, two things came up that were important to note but for this conversation. One is I re-met my grandmother, again, the one I was talking about that I feel very connected with. She came to me and held my hand and thanked me for doing the work that I was doing. And I met a much younger, more vibrant version of her than I've ever met. And I was like, Granny, oh my God. And so I was so excited about that. And it was starting to switch on like, oh my God, why are we only talking about our parents in psychotherapy? It's like, ayahuasca switched on all the generations that came before. I was like, how crazy that psychotherapy is in this hyper focus around mom, dad, and brokenness. And mom, dad, and brokenness is a tiny part of a way bigger story. And we're not thinking correctly because these are big streams of information that are getting passed down, and it's not just my granny, it's my mom, it's me, it's my daughters, it's who they're going to, breed or the wisdom that they'll share. So that was a really next level thing that happened in that session. And then when I went back to my psychotherapy office, my connection with my clients was completely different. I went from feeling like an expert, a man in a white coat, somebody who was, handing out advice as prescriptions, to a kindred member of the human race, hello sister, hello brother, hello friend, hello neighbor, and I literally thought someone had moved my office furniture closer to the couch because that's how much it shifted after taking ayahuasca. So these were big discoveries for someone who was wanting to help other people and wanting to help themselves. But I still kept the two things distinct for a while. But they started to come together because I'd have somebody opposite me with a problem that I knew might be helped by them at least considering ayahuasca or iboga or taking mushrooms or doing some sexual healing or seeing a psychic or just like taking the lid off. Because so many of these problems are also just about overthinking and being too worried and being disconnected from your spirit. And so for me, and this again connects back to my highly spirited and super fun family, and my Scottish roots. And my film director grandfather, there's been a lot of spirit in my family that I've had access to. And I was seeing this sort of lacking spirit in mental health. And I was like, spirit is really helpful, like having fun, but taking ayahuasca is helpful, but it's also really helpful to have like a really fun night out. Yeah. And really connect to that feeling of like, hey, I'm just me. Yeah. And so that's why I started Psychic Psychedelics, is to celebrate these more out of the box modalities, to bridge to those, and also to form community for myself that I hadn't found within being a psychotherapist.
Amazing. Okay. So many questions. So what can you tell me about EMDR? Because I have heard a little bit about it. I've heard that it's very, very effective, but that's pretty much all I know. So can you share with us, like give us a little like primer on EMDR and what it's helpful for?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so EMDR, like psychedelics, kind of reinvigorated my excitement about healing. I became certified as an EMDR practitioner after doing a lot of work with psychedelics, and I felt like they were quite similar in some ways because EMDR gets under the hood of the conscious mind. It really is a system for that, is very, very focused. It can be used it's a trauma healing technology, and it can be used to treat big T traumas like a car crash or a rape. It can also be used to heal developmental traumas or attachment focused traumas. Like, how it was to grow up with your parents. So, but all of these issues project themselves out onto our present day reality. So in EMDR, we might take just a piece of low self-esteem, let's say, that's showing up in a relationship or at work, and we take that and we basically trace it back down the memory line. And we find the origin story, or one of the origin stories. Sometimes there are a few, but usually it goes into kind of early childhood. There's some belief about self that gets a little stuck in based on something small. Like, I was working with a woman this morning who has low self-esteem. She's 40 years old. We traced it back. And you ended up in a memory of her being left out in a game by a dominant girl and making up a story about herself that she wasn't a good hang. She's carried it forward all the way. And, and then it found other places to land, in late teenagehood and early 20s, these negative beliefs about self love to like settle in somewhere and take hold somewhere. So what EMDR does is it applies bilateral stimulation, which now we can do on Zoom, and I can show you. It's tapping on one side, the other side, one side, the other side, one side, the other side. You close your eyes. And we work on memories, essentially, and unpairing a memory from a negative belief about self. So I'll give you another example. Like, and this often happens, let's say in a rape, the person being attacked is often going to make up a story about why they were at fault or why they let it happen. And it's usually not true. But it's like, I'm bad, I'm dirty, I'm unlovable, I shouldn't have. So in EMDR, we can go back into that and we can repair. We can say this terrible thing happened, but it doesn't mean this about me. And the way that we do that is we get back into the actual sense memory in the body, in the breath, in the imagination, right? In the storehouse of memory, and how it tangles together, and we untangle that knot, and we cry or we shake or we yawn or we, you release. We laugh. We invite in new beautiful ideas about the self. We invite in new resources. So we, invite in people who have helped us along the way, or places that inspire us or nurture us. And that's my job as an EMDR therapist, is to guide my client back into their weeds, back into the tangled places. And we invite in release, and we repair what happened with what the thought is about self that is carried forwards. Because there's no reason for us really to be thinking anything much about ourselves, unless we get over-invested. Mm-hmm. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Things happen to us, but it doesn't mean we should think I'm this, I'm that. I mean,
this is so fantastic. Thank you for explaining that, because, in my research on how somebody can work through ancestral trauma, integrate ancestral trauma, EMDR kept coming up as something that was very effective for helping people to do that. So how many sessions does somebody typically need to experience a transformation in their reality? I mean, it must be on a case-by-case basis, but
yes. Well, first I want to get to that, but first I want to clarify that the kind of EMDR that I'm trained in is attachment focused, mm-hmm. which is a much more relational approach and goes into the roots of childhood and the idea that we absorb the atmosphere of our parents and therefore their parents like little sponges. Mm-hmm. So it's sort of like we can't see the wood for the trees. Often the way that we're walking around life is highly informed, always highly informed by childhood. Freud got that bit right. But we don't even necessarily know it. So attachment focused EMDR is getting into those weeds. The traditional, the early EMDR was much more targeted on, the car crash, the rape, the cancer scare, whatever it was, but like something that happened or a phobia, and tackling it like that. So that would be much more like, we're going to clear up that car crash, pieces of PTSD. So this is getting into a more amorphous territory, what I'm talking about, because yes, I've cleared things up in one session, and then there are other things that could be ongoing. So it depends on my work. It depends on my client's receptivity and, all of the strange things that go into healing. It's very, as you know, healing is a weird and wonderful world, but I find EMDR incredibly effective, and I find it more effective than talk therapy alone. And to be honest, I think I find it more directly effective than psychedelics.
Mm-hmm.
Psychedelics are more squirrely. EMDR is direct. It's completely safe. And it's a great way to integrate the psychedelic experience. So I feel very safe with EMDR, and I feel like it's very powerful, and that's a rare combination.
This is so interesting. My goodness. Well, so I love that you're a therapist because I can ask you these questions. Psychedelics, they're not for everybody. And I love how you've made the connection between using EMDR to integrate from a psychedelic journey. What would make you tell somebody that they're not a candidate for engaging with plant medicines or psychedelics as a therapist?
Yeah, that's such a great question. Look, I don't like to be too prescriptive in general because I really feel like everyone should do what they want when it comes to their chemistry. I feel like chemistry and the right to tamper with it is a right.
Mm-hmm.
And I also respect people who are completely sober. So I try not to have a bias about it. That said, I do have a certain amount of experience, and I am concerned about the overuse of psychedelics.
Right.
I feel like psychedelics are wonderful tools for getting temporarily unstuck, sourcing inspiration, sourcing spirit, sourcing joy, getting out a really big telescope and looking in a completely different direction, connecting with your heart. So many wonderful things. And they can be destabilizing. There are many people who are administering who are not centered and not balanced. There are unfortunately, a lot of healers and therapists who are off kilter in their own lives and not doing work on themselves. And it's just a wonky old world out there. I mean, it's a wonky old world in here, and it's a wonky old world out there. Now, I'm an explorer, so I was going to do it anyway. Should I have done it? I don't know. I can't answer questions like that. I think if you're compelled to do it and you want to explore, then I think that's going to write its own story. I think if you have really serious mental health problems in the family, you want to consider that very carefully. If you're on antidepressants, you want to consider that very carefully. If you're going to work with a shaman or a therapist or any kind of healer, you want to consider that very carefully. If you are going to take psychedelics, get an integration protocol in place with someone who is trusted and pre-approved as possible, because that bit is so tender and so important. You're going to turn yourself back into a little chick. Don't surround yourself with wolves, So that's my basic opinion on that.
Thank you. Thank you. That is helpful because I know people listening to this working with psychedelics and plant medicines for healing purposes instead of recreationally, like this is new territory, I think, for most people. So I think this is really helpful to share. Well, so this is the Cycle Starters podcast. And so I have to ask you the question, what new cycles are you starting in your lineage?
Such a good and deep question. I mean, in terms of my mother's family line, I'm starting the cycle of not feeling compelled to cook every meal.
Love it.
I've been going balls for the wall or balls to the wall?
Balls to the wall.
I've been going balls to the wall on the power of authenticity, personal empowerment. I'm a big believer in it. I'm a big believer in our uniqueness and our creativity. And like my mother, I want to celebrate a lot. And unlike my past, I want to celebrate all of it in plain sight and really connect with as many people on humanity. I think it's an absolutely extraordinary thing that we are here and that we're here together And so I don't know if I'm starting a new cycle, but I have a big fire in me to hold hands with a lot of people and rewrite in a way the metrics of success and say, this is success, to show up here truly, tenderly, joyfully, painfully together and write something new together.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. And I so appreciate you saying yes to allowing me to interview you on the podcast. I love your energy. You are just sparkling and bright and so much fun. And I'm hoping that we're going to spend more time together in real life very soon. So
I have a feeling, yes.
yes, I
Yeah.
have a very strong feeling that this
Yeah.
is going to happen. But yeah, loving your energy, the little beasts in the background, my beasts. If people want to find out more about you, if they want to work with you, where should they go to learn more?
Yes, good question. So you can find me on Instagram. It's kind of my hub at thebananajane. And that will also link you to my podcast, Sex, Psychics, and Psychedelics. I have also recently started a wonderful party called HeartParty. And we've just had our first one in LA, and we've got one coming up on Valentine's Day. I don't know if this podcast will be out by then. I hope it will. But
I'm hoping it will be, yes.
Yes, that would be amazing, because we are inviting in the whole healing circus and celebrating the idea that we are the medicine. We're psychedelic adjacent, psychedelic friendly, but also sober friendly. We are the medicine. Nice. And it's a terrific time and a chance to meet lots of different healers as well. So we're going to do a speed healing event, in fact, there. So join us at HeartParty. We also have an Instagram, HeartParty. And I think that's it.
You know what I forgot to ask you? Thank you for sharing all of those links and all that information. The Banana Jane, where does the banana come from? Tell us. We have to know.
Gosh, this is okay. It's so hard to tell as a short story, but this is the inner child, really. So when I was about 8 or something like that, actually probably closer to 6, I was quite depressed. Life was quite gloomy. I had left my home. I didn't know where my dad was. My mum was depressed, and I was in a math class, and the world looked so dreary. And I'd just been told that I was allowed to choose my middle name. That's a whole other story. But I was told I was allowed to choose my middle name. And for some reason, in this math class, I thought, what would cheer up this room? What would cheer me up? And I imagined a giant banana, kind of like a Cheshire cat smile, hanging over it was like this weird medicine vision, hanging over the classroom, hanging over the black and white numbers. And this splash of yellow was a massive kind of antidepressant, rebellion, celebration. It was like, I'll just be a banana. I was like, I'll be Jane Banana Garnett. And then over time became Banana Jane. But it was a sort of celebration of the imagination, the fool, and this thing of just like, I'll just add some joy to the picture. Like, I can't find it, so I'm just gonna add it. And I let it go because I thought it was stupid. As I got older, I was like, oh, that's so babyish. And I let it go. And then it just kind of came back to me like a boomerang. I honestly can't even tell you how. I think maybe some family members remembered it or something. And I, as a therapist, I was like, actually, this is a great thing to celebrate, because not only was it obviously like some weird vision thing, I had like spirit fruit vision, but also if I call myself Banana Jane, I can't take myself that seriously. And I think that that's there's something very valuable about that. So I really welcome the kind of the fool position and the unlearning that inner child memory gives me.
Thank you for sharing that story. That's so fun. And I love how you were sensing, like, what does this environment need? It needs some humor, some joy, some lightness. And that was you feeling into the situation and feeling into the collective vibe. So you being psychic from a very young age. All right. Well, thank you for answering that. Well, we're just gonna have to do another podcast episode in the future. But
yes, I'd love to. Yeah.
Thank you
I'd love to have
so
you
much. Yes,
Yes.
we're going to talk. We're going to
Yeah.
talk. So I will put all of those links in the description below this
Mm-hmm.
video. And I am wishing you all the solstice blessings, all of the Gregorian New Year blessings. I look forward to seeing you in person soon. And thank you again so much for joining me today. I really appreciate you, and I'm so glad that I met you. This has just been fabulous.
Oh, I feel the same. Thank you so much for having me.
You're so welcome. So we will see you all next time on the Cycle Starters podcast. Take care, everybody.